It's brand new, and E-flite decided to shake things up and fill a lot of requests at the same time. This could be the most beautiful airplane E-flite has ever made, and we got it right here for you coming up. What's up, everybody? You're watching Model Aviator. My name's Adam, and this is the brand new 1.5 m E-flite Beechcraft D18, and it is a beauty. Let's take a look. There's no angle that you can stare at a Beech 18 from where it isn't beautiful. I don't know if it's the tail dragger configuration, maybe it's the round engines, maybe the twin verticals, but there's just something about this airplane. It is stunning. And this is a release that stunned quite a few people, including yours truly. Apparently there is a forum where people can request what airplane they'd like for E-flite to release next, and for quite a few years they've been saying Beechcraft 18, and E-flite came through for them. You can get this model in a bind and fly or a plug and play, and with the bind and fly you have some differential thrust mixed in. You can also take advantage of that with the plug and play if you use a smart receiver. More on that in a little bit. The airplane flies on a 3S 3200 to a 4S 4000, but you know people are going to use bigger batteries than that, and looking at the cavernous battery bay and knowing how this airplane flies now, I think anybody that decides they want to go with a 5000, if they put it a little further back, they'll be just fine. So with that, yeah, let's get to the review. So first things first, how's this thing packaged? Well, very well, and it's a good thing. I mean, it's nothing new. Most companies have got this figured out. They know how to pack these airplanes to get them to your doorstep in good nick, and it's a good thing because for some reason, I don't know what's up with FedEx in my area. I don't know if they're playing kickball with these things or what is going on, but the last few airplanes I've received, the outer box was in rough shape. But inside, the parts, thankfully, were perfect. So when it comes to getting this thing together, Horizon is known for, and I think their thing is to make airplanes as easy to assemble as possible, and this is no exception. The Beech 18 comes with a great manual that is very, very descriptive. Getting it together is a matter of 4 bolts to get the main wing part onto the fuselage. The nacelles are already mounted. The props are even already installed, although I would recommend that you tighten those up. Just make sure they're tight before you run the airplane up. The outer wing panels just clip on, and that plugs in the aileron and the lights, which it has lights, which are awesome. And the tail section is already pre-built. You only have to screw it down with 2 self-tapping screws, and the only push rod that you have to mess with is the push rod to the elevator, and that's pretty easy to get on. I would recommend taking the hatch off and take your control arm off of the servo to the elevator so that you can just run that push rod back. It makes getting the elevator hooked up and putting this on really easy, and then you just put your servo arm back on the servo. When it comes to setting the airplane up, there is a manual addendum, and it comes with this plywood template, and that is meant for you to put here so that you can set your elevator at rest position. And you want to make sure, since this airplane requires some down elevator, and that's what they're providing this for, especially if you have the bind and fly, so that you don't affect negatively the AS3X. You want to make sure that you take the time to mechanically adjust that with the clevis. Don't do it with sub trim or anything like that. And then once you do that, you just basically bind it to your transmitter, set it up per the manual. If you have the plug and play, put your receiver of choice in there, bind that to your transmitter, get it set up, you're good to go. So airplane's built, set up, time to go fly, right? Well, it is, and we're definitely going to show you some flying footage, but I need to preface that with a couple of pretty important points. The first thing is, we ordered this thing the very day that it was announced. Came home, did a little bit of research after work, and then placed the order. And we ordered the plug and play for 2 reasons. The first reason is every review that you see is going to be on the bind and fly. That's just what almost everybody buys. And there's just not a whole lot of information about how good an airframe, just purely the airframe with no stabilization, can be set up to fly. So we wanted to do that. I'm always curious when they offer both, how good is the actual plane, just the pure airframe? Is it an honest airframe? Maybe not. Does it need stabilization? Because some airplanes do. Some airplanes clearly, even in calm conditions, will not fly as well without one as they will with one. They need it because there's some sort of issue with the design that makes them need it. And so I was curious. The second thing is, on the first day, there wasn't quite as much information as there is now. I didn't know after the first day that you could turn the differential thrust off with forward programming. The skinny on that is, it's there with the bind and fly. If you buy the plug and play, if you don't use a smart receiver, you don't have that option, so it isn't there. I'm pretty good with rudder, pretty good with tail draggers. I was pretty confident that I could take off and land this airplane without the differential thrust. So we ordered the plug and play, thinking that with our AR620 non-AS3X, non-safe, non-smart receiver, that we wouldn't have differential thrust. So let's see how that went. We're going to show you Maiden Day, and we're going to show you the day after the Maiden when we went to a different venue and we flew it in pretty good amount of wind. It was constant 6 or 7, gusting to 12 to 15, so it was windy. And of course we don't have AS3X, so we'd done something to make our setup a little bit worse. We'll tell you what we did after this flight footage, and we'll tell you how we fixed it, and then we'll show you some flight footage with the airplane actually set up properly that is really, really good after that. So check this out. So we're going to show you the meat and potatoes of our Maiden Day, the takeoff, the landing, the stall tests as usual. But watch this taxi turn around. Look at that right prop, dead stopped. Even though we're not supposed to have it, we have differential thrust. Interesting. Here we're coming around for our stall tests. This is the clean stall test. And the airplane starts moving to the left. I keep holding the up elevator in and finally drops that left wing, neutralizes the controls, flies right out of it. So now we're dropping the gear and the flaps to get it dirty, and we're going to do the dirty test. And this is interesting. This doesn't happen with every plane, but it happens sometimes. Dirty, it actually goes to the right, and it's much less severe. The stock tail wheel is a little bit slippery on geotextile. We ended up changing that to a Dubro. We're going to kill two birds with one stone with this little bit of footage. We're going to show you some grouse operations with the Beech, let you see how it does there, and we're going to demonstrate how well the plug and play flies without stabilization in a pretty hefty crosswind. So we're showing you the most critical part of the flight, takeoffs and landings. So check this out. "15-mile-an-hour crosswind gusts make things interesting, but I have to say the Beech handled it pretty well. You just got to be on your game." So as you saw, we had a bit of a surprise on Maiden Day. We had a plug and play with a non-smart receiver, and even though Horizon says that is the combination that renders the differential thrust inactive, we had differential thrust. So what does that mean? How did that happen? Well, it's important to understand how differential thrust works normally. Normally, you have to do several mixes in your transmitter. You have two separate throttle channels. You mix those together, you do some mixing with rudder, and through some creative mixing, you make differential thrust happen. It's all about what you program in your transmitter and tell that receiver to do. Well, with this one, everything is in that Smart ESC because there's no programming of your transmitter, no mixing that you have to do to make differential thrust work. It just is there, which means that that Smart ESC handles all of that for you. So what does that mean? Well, that means that even if you don't fly Spectrum as a protocol, if you fly FR Sky or if you Taba or whoever, if you buy the plug and play and put your receiver in here, you will have the differential thrust as well. Now you won't be able to turn it off, but you'll have it. And that's pretty cool for the people that want one of these and don't fly Spectrum. I mentioned that made a bit of a setup error that affected things adversely. It made the airplane fly not so good. We used sub-trim to center our rudders. They weren't centered right out of the box, and rather than taking the tail section on and off as many times as I needed to mechanically adjust it, and when you mechanically adjust this, you need to do that. You need to understand that just holding it down and eyeballing it isn't good enough. You need to put both screws back in here, get it tightened down, and then check it. If it's not right, take it off, make another adjustment on the clevis until you get them centered. I didn't take the time to do that. I cut a corner because I was in a hurry to film this thing. I figured I'd fix it later. And the fact that I had to put sub-trim in it, thinking that that wouldn't be a big deal for a couple of days because we didn't have differential thrust. When we had differential thrust, that caused me a problem. So I'm at the field at a place where I really don't want to make adjustments to the airplane by taking it apart, and I've got some adverse yaw caused by the fact that these aren't in sync anymore because of the sub-trim. That made the airplane a bit more of a handful to fly than it should have been the first couple of days. Once I realized my mistake and made those adjustments, the airplane flew way, way better. It's the dream boat that everybody says it is when those things are in sync. So we are going to show you a flight with the airplane set up right. It's a beautiful flight. We'll show you our setup page. Before we do that, interesting thing about this setup page, we actually have rates in this airplane for the elevator. Very elevator sensitive, and we use a rate to taxi and take off that gives us a bit more elevator for flare if we need it. You don't have to use that. You can wheel land it pretty easily without it, but if you want to get it to a 3-point, you're going to need that. You might need it if you're taxiing through rough grass. Once we get the airplane in the air, we flip it to a much less aggressive elevator setting to fly the airplane around and do the scale and sport aerobatics that you're going to see us do with it in this flight. So that's why there's 2 rates, but only on the elevator. And the other thing that we're going to show you before we get to the flying, we made a couple of improvements back here that you need to know about. We're going to share them with you now. The first thing that we recommend you do is when you get your airplane, we didn't check this until later. You can check yours right out of the box. When you get your airplane and you pull your tail section out, take the little extension on the push rods that hook the 2 rudders together, the part that goes in the tiller arm that moves the rudders, and move that back and forth. Ours was incredibly tight, really kind of bound up in there. I think there's just gunk in there. It needed to be lubricated, so we put hobby oil in the push rods, on the ball links, on the end of the rudders, and in the little foam channel that push rod slides in. Our hobby oil doesn't have an adverse effect on plastic or foam or anything like that. And then we can take that thing and move it super easy. That will really lighten the load on your servo, and that is worth doing. Now, something else that we did that you don't have to do, but if you want to, we wanted more rudder throw, and we figured a way to get it, and here's how we did it. So basically what you're looking at now is what you see when you pull the tail section off. You've got the push rod coming from the front of the airplane and a clevis that hooks to the outermost hole on the tiller arm for the tail wheel. Then you go 2 holes in and you have a clevis that's hooked to the push rod that goes back to a Z-bend that is in the outermost hole of the tiller arm that actually moves the 2 rudders. What we did here, as you can see, we took the clevis that comes from the push rod on the servo and put it in the innermost hole on the tiller arm that moves the tail wheel. We flipped the push rod that moves the rudders and put the Z-bend on the outermost hole on the tiller arm from the tail wheel, which moves the rudder tiller arm. We put a slight bend, and you'll see the reason for that here in a second. There's a slight bend in our push rod, and we hooked our clevis to the innermost hole of the tiller arm that moves the rudders. That will give you more rudder throw, and you can see here at full deflection why we put that bend, so it will clear forward. And that gave us a lot more rudder and a lot more control on takeoff. When you have the differential thrust and more rudder throw, you're able to get a really good controlled takeoff, and you're going to see that now. We're going to show you our setup page, and we'll go to our final flight of the episode, and then we'll sum this thing up. Pay close attention to this takeoff run. It is right down the center, straight as an arrow, and that extra rudder throw combined with the differential thrust made it happen. Check it out. Even on the takeoff roll on this flight, things felt different. With everything sorted, it's a different airplane. With no rudder trim messing up the differential thrust and causing me all kinds of adverse yaw problems that increase in intensity as I change throttle settings, it's just an absolute beautiful flying airplane. It felt totally different.
I learned a valuable lesson. I won't get in a hurry and cut a corner to get footage again, that's for sure. Here we're doing a Matt Yunkin style Cuban 8, and one of the things that I really like about the Beech 18 is how much power it has on 4-cell. You can actually enter a vertical maneuver at a slower speed and then power up into the maneuver to mimic momentum. Really make those maneuvers look scale when you want to. We're going to show off the speed envelope of the D18 with a slow pass, and then we'll come around and come the other way, cook it. Here's a way tighter than scale Humpty Bump. The Beech has got enough power and agility to handle most sport aerobatics that you might decide you want to do with it. It spins a little funky, but it spins. I like the combination of the differential thrust and our added rudder throw. You have a lot of control. On this touch and go in a one-wheel attempt, I'm able to make much smaller rudder inputs than I think I would be making if we didn't add the rudder throw. that rubber Dubro tail wheel really makes a difference on the geotextile.
That was fun. That is the flying experience we were looking for in the first place. That's what we were hoping we'd get out of this airframe, and we absolutely did. Helps if you get the setup right and you don't use sub-trim and screw up your differential thrust. Get this airplane set up right, it is amazing. It is everything that you hear that it is from other pilots. And I think we've proven here at Model Aviator that it is a good, honest airframe, period. With or without stabilization, you can set this airplane up and it is a smooth, forgiving, wonderful classic scale twin. And that's really something. It really doesn't have any bad habits. You saw how slow we were able to fly it. We did some turns slow with full flaps down. It will stall, obviously, and it will drop a wing if you hold it in that stall for a while. But to be honest, it gives you a lot of indication that things are about to go bad. If you're paying attention to that, you unload the airframe and get your stuff together, you shouldn't be able to fly this thing into any trouble unless you're really trying. The only negative that I can think of would be the little bit of misinformation by Horizon Hobby as far as what you get with the plug and play and whether or not that differential thrust works and with what type of receiver. They said you had to have a smart receiver. We don't, and it still works. Now that's not a big deal to me because the differential thrust doesn't bother me. However, somebody else that buys this airplane that is not on Spectrum protocol and can't turn that off if they decide that they don't like it, well, they're just kind of stuck with it, and they've been misled into thinking that they're not going to have it and it's going to be there. So Horizon needs to kind of get it together if they haven't, which, to be fair, maybe they've already corrected that, but if they haven't, they need to make sure that the information they're giving on the plug and play is correct, because at least as far as I know, it isn't. Other than that, I can't think of a bad thing to say about it. When it comes to getting this airplane together, it goes together very easy. Anyone of the skill level to be thinking about buying and flying this airplane is going to be able to easily get this thing together. You will have put some foamies together before. This is not going to be any trouble. Super easy to assemble, pretty easy to set up in your transmitter, and pretty easy to fly. It is not a beginner's airplane, obviously. We recommend it for an intermediate pilot with some tail dragger experience and some tail dragger confidence. And the reason I say that, if you want to just punch and go, there's not really a torque issue because you got counter-rotating props. You can get away with that. And if you haul the airplane off in just a couple of plane lengths, it's got the power and the good slow flight characteristics for you to be able to get away with that. If you want to do a nice long scale takeoff, that's a different story. If you're doing it off grass, grass makes everything easier. It's not that difficult there. But if you want to do that kind of slow scale takeoff on a smooth surface, you're going to have some rudder skill, because this thing is a little bit of a handful in that kind of takeoff. But other than that, and maybe the elevator sensitivity, which you can certainly tone down with programming, it's just a wonderful flying airplane, easy to put together. It's beautiful. One of the things I love most about it, it's a rarely modeled classic twin that you just don't see modeled in any form, much less a foamy, and thanks to E-flite, here it is. So we're really glad to have this in our hangar. I think if you're interested in the Beech 18, you will love it as well. We will put a link in the description where you can go and order one from Horizon Hobby if you'd like. There's one other thing I wanted to point out. You may have seen this on the setup page. One thing we didn't talk about is the fact that we used a Dubro 1-inch heavy actual rubber tail wheel. The reason we did that is to make this tail, which is kind of light, grip a little better on the geotextile, and it absolutely worked. So if you're flying off geo or maybe really smooth pavement, you may want to change the tail wheel to one of those, and it will help you there. So that's it for us. We love it. We recommend it. 2 thumbs up. Check the link in the description. If you're interested, please like, comment, and subscribe. And we hopefully will see you with us next week. We'll have something else cool with wings. And I'll give you a little hint. What we got next week goes like a rocket.